Hello and welcome back, and the Christmas season has come around once again. Although, knowing my luck, it'll probably be long after Christmas by the time I get this video uploaded. Anyway, let's see what gift of a review I have for you today. Yeah, a long while back I made a couple of references to this game, and I guess the day has come for me to actually review it. But first, a bit of backstory behind the game's development, because personally I find it fucking hilarious. So first, Sega gets the publishing rights from 20th Century Fox to make this game, and then it hands over the development to Gearbox Software, who, instead of actually making the game with all the money they're being given, decides to funnel the money onto the Borderlands series, meanwhile subcontracting a revolving door of smaller developers to actually make it. But then Sega starts sending requests down to the developers to make the game more like Call of Duty, and then they show off trailers and demos for the game using a separate engine from the one the game is actually being developed on, and passing it off as gameplay and footage from the final product. And then the developers are forced to basically crunch like hell in order to get the thing to its deadline. And when the game is finally released, it's a buggy, disappointing mess, and the situation around it is so bad that Sega and Gearbox get sued for misleading advertising. But let's get into the game itself. You play as one of the colonial marines who has received a distress signal from the ship from aliens, the Soloco, who is now orbiting the planet of aliens after mysteriously disappearing from the orbit of the penal colony from Alien 3. You and your comrade board the ship to find it infested with a bunch of xenomorphs running about, and have found out the cause is a certain Weyland-Yutani Corporation. You know, the actual bad guys of the series. And if that wasn't bad enough, Weyland-Yutani are sending a bunch of their paid mercenaries to recapture the xenomorphs, as well as kill anyone who's seen what's going on and might spill the beans, including you and your comrades. So the Space Marine ship gets blown up, the Soloco gets damaged, the Space Marines have to escape the ship and end up landing and huddling down in the somewhat destroyed remains of the terraforming station. Looks in pretty good nick despite essentially getting nuked at the end of Aliens. However, one of the Marines has a chest burster inside of them, so you break into a recently constructed Weyland-Yutani research facility built around the alien ship that kind of looks like a toilet seat. However, you find out from one of the incumbent scientists that there's nothing you can do to stop the chest burster, so she dies, meaning this entire escapade was utterly pointless. However, you also find out that Weyland-Yutani has captured a survivor from the Soloco, who turns out to be Hicks, complete with his original actor doing the voice. And if you're wondering how the fuck he's still alive despite dying in the escape pod in Alien 3, you can find the answers in the DLC! Great! So you round up as many surviving Marines as you can to fight off endless hordes of xenomorphs and Weyland mercs, to try and get aboard their ship, get chased around by an escaped alien queen that Weyland-Yutani somehow managed to get their hands on, get aboard the Weyland-Yutani ship, launch the alien queen out of the Weyland-Yutani ship, somehow managed to take over the Weyland-Yutani ship off screen, and shoot another Lance Hendricks bot. And that's the end. This game is what I would describe as textbook definition of mediocre. Admittedly, I played a later version of the game that has been heavily patched and is less buggy than the game was at launch. So sadly I was deprived of seeing xenomorphs getting stuck on objects and bugging out trying to find out where the fuck they are. All apparently was caused by one spelling mistake in the xenomorph's code where they accidentally typed tether instead of tether. However, even after all these patches, the game still has some performance issues. The ones I personally experience is textures taking about 30 seconds to a minute to properly load in, even while you're playing the game, and your AI comrades spawning right in front of you if you walk too far away from them. But apart from those few teething troubles, the game is mostly a very standard first-person shooter for the time. You have a large assortment of weapons, but apart from the iconic pulse rifle, most of them are very generic and forgettable, even if you can upgrade them throughout the game. As for enemies, you have the standard xenomorphs that come out from every angle rushing you, and despite killing you very quickly, can also die to a single shotgun blast. You have an acid-spitting variant that does as the name implies, a blind self-destructing xenomorph that only appears for one level of the game, as well as a bunch of special xenomorphs that you only really fight as bosses. The rest of the time you will be fighting Weyland-Yutani mercenaries, hiding behind cover and shooting you with pinpoint accuracy. Oh, and this game had co-op! Emphasis on the word had. The graphics are pretty underwhelming for a game of its time. In fact, it doesn't really seem that far removed from something you would see in Half-Life's Source engine. The aesthetics of the game, while trying to emulate the movies, ends up coming across as bland and forgettable. And the character models just come across as emotionless and kind of awkward, especially in cutscenes. And whilst no one can hear you scream in space, Music Meister certainly heard this game's soundtrack. So let's see what he thinks. While the game's soundtrack tries to be reminiscent of the movie and does borrow a few motifs, it sort of lacks the sort of dark ambience the movies had. Although I will say it's properly fitting for this specific kind of game. Other than that, I'd say the soundtrack does a pretty good job and probably the high point of this game. Although that's not really saying much, is it? So after all the stress and struggles that went on behind the scenes and the multiple patches to try and get this game into a semi-working state, my final thoughts on this game is eh. The story is boring and unimpressive and goes out of its way to make callbacks to the previous movies regardless of how little they make sense. The gameplay is generic and unimpressive, and it somehow managed to make the xenomorphs both annoying and pathetic. The graphics feel at least 5 years behind everything else that was coming out around this time, and music's admittedly alright. The game isn't even so bad it's funny, it's just underwhelmingly mid. And personally I wouldn't recommend playing this game unless you come in with the same intention as me, as something that can test your own self-worth. Well, that's all from me. See you guys next time.